I came to shul to say shir because at home it's too busy. So that's why I'm at my regular place. Okay, so let's see the Heilige Gemara. We're 2 lines from the Banim on Daf Mem Vav Amud Beis. Tanu Rabbanim. Misha Bava Amar Gerani. Someone came to Bezdin and said, I'm a ger. I went through the process already. So the Gemara says, Yachal Nikablenu. You might think, the Bryce says, you might think we accept it and we trust him. Talmud Leimer Itcha b'muchsak la'ach. We can't just accept anybody who comes and says he's a ger. Only if we have proof, we know for sure that he went through the proper gears. But the Edohimoy, what if he came and brought Edom that say Eidos that he was Megayer properly? Minayin, how do you know that you can believe him? Talmud Leimer v'chiyoger Rashi's mikol makon. Rashi says the Gemara is going to ask, you need a pasuk to tell you that you believe to Edom, to say someone was Megayer? What better raya can someone have than that? Then the pasuk says, Ba'artzachem. The pasuk is Ba'artzachem. When someone becomes a ger in your land, meaning in Eretz Yisrael. So, Ein Li, on the top of Hamzayin Lamed Aleph, I would only know Ba'aretz, that you could be Mekabel Gerim in Eretz Yisrael. B'chutz La'aretz, Minayin. How do you know that B'chutz La'aretz, if someone wants to come and become a Jew, how do you know you can accept him? Talmud Leimer Itcha B'chol Makom She'itcha. Now the problem is, we used Itcha just a moment ago to tell you that it has to be b'muchsak itcha. So the Gemara is going to challenge first this brisa. How could we use itcha twice? But I'll call upon them from itcha. We're learning that you makabel gerim everywhere. Why did it say ba'artzachem? Indicating that maybe you're only makabel gerim in Eretz Yisrael. So the Gemara ba'aretz tzarich lavi raya. If you claim that you're a yid, if you claim that you're a ger in Eretz Yisrael, then we don't trust you. Then you have to bring a raya that you're a yid. But the chutz la'aretz, in chutz la'aretz ain't tzarich lavi raya. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Now the logic behind it, which we're going to see shortly, is when we're in Eretz Yisrael and when we're in our glory, many people would want to become part of Klal Yisrael. Like we learned in the Megillah that many people were misyadim kinofal pakad Yehudim alayim. So there, not anybody can just come and say, I'm a Jew. So they have to prove it. But in Chutz La'aretz, when we're in Golus, where it's not glamorous at all to be a Jew, if someone's saying I'm a Jew, there he doesn't need to bring a raya. That is the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. The Chammaimer, no, bein ba'aretz, bein b'chutz la'aretz, tzarich lavi raya. Anywhere you are, if you want to claim that you went through a Geirus, you have to bring a proper raya. So that's the end of the brisa. Now the Gemara is going to break it up, chop it up, stanza by stanza, and analyze it. So bahu be'edavimon. That was one of the cases the Brisa quoted. If you brought Edom, we have a pasuk that says v'chiyager that you accept Edom. Do I need a pasuk that you believe Edom? Amar Psheishis, the Edom didn't say we saw a proper Geirus. Of course, you wouldn't need a pasuk for that. But the Amri Shemani Sheniskari Bevezin Shalplani. All they said is we heard that this fellow Taka was Megayer and this Bezin, but they didn't actually witness the Geirus. So you might think you don't believe them. To tell you, even the Shvacher Raya, that they just heard that he was a ger, that's good enough. Then the Brisa goes on and says, Ba'artzachem, Ainli Ba'aretz, Ainli Ela Ba'aretz. I would think that you can only be Mekabel Geir in Eretz Yisrael. The Chutz La'aretz Minayin, Tamalam Itcha, the Chomakam Sheitcha. Frank the Gemara, well, Afikte, we use already Itcha to tell you that you need to bring a raya. So the Gemara, yeah, but there's 2 words. Chadamay itcha, the chadamay imcha, and it's a shaila if it's ma'imcha or if ma'imchem. There's different psukim that it could be referring to, but whatever it is, we have an extra pasuk. One to tell you that he needs to prove that he's a ger, and the second pasuk is to tell you that will be makabel gerim in all places. The Chachamim say, bein ba'aretz, bein b'chutz la'aretz tzarich lavi raya. He doesn't learn from Ba'artzachem that you only have to bring a raya in Eretz Yisrael. Rather, the Chachamim say wherever you are, you have to bring a raya if you claim you're Jewish. It does say Ba'artzachem. What is the Torah telling us with the word Ba'artzachem? So tomorrow that's Hahumi Boyele, Tafilu Berish Makabel Gerim. That's to tell you that even in Eretz Yisrael, when we're in our glory, you're still going to be Makabel Gerim. You might think that why is he coming to become a ger? because he wants to join in the good of Eretz Yisrael. And Rashi says, what's the good of Eretz Yisrael? Zavas Chalabut Vash. He's coming to take advantage of the wonderful natural resources that are plentiful in Eretz Yisrael. And now that Rashi says it's Pasak, Zavas Chalabut Vash, Eretz Yisrael no longer has those special resources. There's still a reason why a goy would want to join Eretz Yisrael, because of our phenomenal social programs and the phenomenal social safety net that we have by Yiddishkeit. All these programs for poor people. So naturally they'll want to join Klal Yisrael. Kamash Malon, that even though there is a tremendous ulterior motive that is possible, we trust them when we let them become Geir. What's the halacha? If someone claims that he went through a proper Geirus, no matter where it is, he must bring a raya that, in fact, that happened, like the Chachamim hold, not like Rabbi Yehuda. Why do we need Rabbi Yehuda to tell me that we pass like the Chachamim, neged the Yochid of Rabbi Yehuda? It's possible. Rabbi Yehuda has a very geshmak raya. It says ba'artzichem. It was a little shrelik to learn that ba'artzichem tells you even Mekabel Ger in Eretz Yisrael. Pashut the ba'artzichem tells you that only there you need a raya. But Mashmalon, that you need a raya everywhere, and we pass like the Chacham. Tanu Rabbanan. Ushafatatem tzedek vein ishu vein achil vein geiroi. Mikan Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Ger sheniskar bebezdin. If a ger was megayer through the proper channels in bezdin, harei a ger. But if he used the YouTube version and he did it with the do-it-yourself version that he found on YouTube, ain't a ger. That doesn't work. Someone came and presented himself in front of Rabbi Yehuda. He told Rabbi Yehuda, I made myself a ger. My Geirus was the YouTube do-it-yourself version. Amar le Rabbi Yehuda, yesh lach edim. Do you have edim that you were megayer? Amar le la. Then Rabbi Yehuda asked him, yesh lach banim. Do you have children? Amar le hein. Amar le. So he told him, you're believed to pass you, meaning your Geirus is not a good Geirus, and you're a guy, but your children have a good status. But you don't have an emunus to pass your children. So we'll still consider your children Yisraelim Ksherim. Correct the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda, that Abanim Le Mehemet. Does Rabbi Yehuda hold that a father is not believed to clarify and declare the status of his children? But Tanya, we learned by Bechira, we said, Ki es ha-bechor ben ha-sanua yakir losses like pishnayim. Even if he has a wife who he hates, that wife's oldest child is still his bechor, and he has to give that child pishnayim. And we darshan yakirenu la'acherim. He's believed to identify who is his oldest child for other people. He has a special nemonos. Mikadam Rabbi Yehuda, that nemon adam loimer zebeni bechor. A person is nemon to identify which one is his bechor, and therefore will take pishnayim. And it goes even further. He's also believed to say that this child is pasal l'kauna. He's believed to declare and clarify the yichus status of his child. That's a special namanis. But a kalpana, Rabbi Yehuda says he's neman. So if Rabbi Yehuda says he's neman, this fellow came along and said that he had a pasal of Geirus. Why is he not neman to pasal his children? A father has a nemanus. I'll tell you why he's not believed. This is what Rabbi Yehuda told him. If I listen to your words, you're a guy. If you're a guy, then this Allah of Yakir, that a father can identify his children, that's only if he's a yid. But if a guy can't do that, so by the mere fact that you declared yourself as a guy, you no longer have an emunus lagabe those children, those kids who you say are your children. And therefore, your children remain Yisraelim Ksherim while you are a goy. Ravina Amar Hachika Amalei. Ravina says there's a different reason why Rabbi Yehuda trusted him for himself, but not for his children. And he said as follows: Yesh lach banim. He asked this gentleman, "You have children?" Hein. Yes, I do. Yesh lach b'nei banim. Do you have grandchildren? Hein. Yes, I do. Amalei Zok Ravina Neman Ata. Ravina said this is Rabbi Yehuda responded. Neman Ata lisol b'necha. Yakir gives you the power to identify your children, but it gives you no power to declare the status of your grandchildren. So therefore, when does Yakir work? That's before your children have grandchildren. Once before your children have children, then you're Neman. And then the fallout will stand. And if they have children later, of course, your Nemanus is still there. But if they already have grandchildren, by the time you make your declaration, you're not believed. And I would say, as far as Pashin, if I'm declaring amongst my children who's the Bechar, no, they'll accept it. But once there's grandchildren involved and spouses involved, war will break out if they don't like my declaration. But I'm just saying my own little joke. But about it, the Torah is telling you that there's only an amonis for children when there's no grandchildren. And therefore, since in this case there were grandchildren, he did not have the amonis of Yakir. Tanya Namihachi, we have a brisa that supports this rule that you're only Neman with Yakir if there's children only, but no grandchildren. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Neman Adam Loimer al B'nai Katan, Vei Neman al B'nai Godo. L'Amar Rabbi Chibar Abba Omer B'nai Katan, L'Loi Katan Mamish. Katan doesn't mean minor, L'Loi Godel Mamish, and Godel doesn't mean over bar mitzvah. And the Katan V'yesh Leibonim, a young child who has children, Zo Godel. Once there's grandchildren involved, there's no Nemanas even on the children. Godel V'ein Leibonim Zo Katan. The child could be 40 years old, but if the child doesn't have any children of his own, that's considered a katan, and the father is still Neman. The Hilchas of Kabaseder Rab Nachman bar Yitzchak. We pass like Rab Nachman bar Yitzchak that once he declares himself as a guy, he's no longer Neman on his children. In fact, the Gemara about Tanya Kabaseder Ravina, didn't we just bring a raya that supported Ravina's svara that says that you're only Neman on your children before they have their own children? So Gemara, yes, but Ahula Inyan Yakir Itmar. That was only said Lagabi Yakir, meaning you could only identify who's a Bechar when there's only children. Once there's grandchildren, you can no longer identify who's a Bechar. That stands. But a Goy who claims I'm a Goy, of course, he's not Neman at all because now he's a Goy. Tan Rabban. Geirus This is a beautiful brisa that walks us through step by step the Geirus process, which the Gemara will then proceed to analyze line by line. So Geirus they tell him, what do you need this for? That you want to become Jewish? You don't need this. Don't you know Yisrael b'zman devuyim? Klal Yisrael is devuyim. I think devuyim comes from Alzahaya Dovi Libenu. Our hearts are broken. We're a broken nation. We're desolate. We're destitute. We're depressed. The chufim were pushed. Schufim. Rashi says schufim means shfelim. We're low and we're bent over. U'muterafim, we're beaten. The Yisurim bon aleim and Klal Yisrael are constantly suffering Yisurim. You don't need this. If the Ger answers such a beautiful answer, I know the suffering that Klal Yisrael goes through. The Eini Kedai, and I'm not even worthy of joining Klal Yisrael to be part of their suffering. Even that I'm not worthy of. Halavai, you should accept me as a Ger to suffer with you. That's such a beautiful answer. Makabel Oisemiyad. Right away, after such an answer, they accept this person as a ger. They tell him about some of the easy mitzvahs, and some of the hard mitzvahs. And they teach him about the oven, the aver of leka, chikha, peo, meiser, ani. And of course, the Gemara is going on to know why is this mitzvah important for the ger. They tell him about the onchim for someone who doesn't do the mitzvahs or who does averis. I remember they tell him, you should know, up until this point where you decided that you wanted to be a Jew, before you decided you wanted to be a Jew, if you ate chalev, you were able to do things. But now that you want to be Jewish, you're restricting yourself. You don't need it. And then they tell them the same way they tell them the einish for someone who's over. They also tell them the good side. They tell them how you should know Olam haba is only for tzaddikim. The Yisrael b'zman and Yidden nowadays we're not tzaddikim. Einam yecholim lakabel. We're not going to be able to be makabel. Loy roiv toiva, not the great good, turning on to Amud Beis. Not the great good, for others. And Rashi says because we're plagued by the nisyonis of the Yetzer Hara today, and we do so many averis Therefore, we're never going to be Zaycha to Rav Toiva. But also, we don't get punished right for onions because the Rebbeinu Shalom understands that he doesn't want it to destroy us completely. So Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't share with us the full wrath of what we're deserving of. Now, the Ein Marbin Allah, but you don't go too far to scare him off. That much you don't do. You discourage him, but you don't spook him. Vein medaktik Allah, and you're not medaktik too much with him. You stay general. Kiva, if he is mekabel, even after you've told him all of these things that would convince him otherwise, malin oisei miyad. Right away, you give him a bris, you accept him as a yid. Nishtari boy tzitzin ha'ma'akvin hamila. What happens when they did the bris? They left some of the foreskin. They didn't cut it all off. Then they have to take off all the foreskin. Nisrapa, once he gets healed, of course, you're not going to toivel him when he's still wounded from the bris. Once he's fully healed, then matbil noisem miyad, you toivel him right away. So Toshva says something very important. Why don't you make the tefillah first, and then you can make the milah afterwards? To make the milah first, you have to wait until it heals to do the tefillah. So Toshva is mashma shamila koydem tefillah. Milah happens before tefillah. Uchud Omar ein ger at shiyomol v'yitbal. You always find a nusach of milah being first. The time of Toshva the Amar ba'ara muberish neskayr b'na muberish neskayr kama b'na intrich tefillah. Meaning, the child of a muberis who neskayr doesn't need tefillah. Why? Because she toiled already. But the child will need a bris. So here you have a child who has a bris after the tefillah. The reason why the tefillah there worked before the milah, because at that point, while the child wasn't even born yet, it wasn't royu for milah. So therefore, the tefillah will work. While he's doing tefillah, there's two Talmidei Chacham that are standing and supervising him. As he's toiveling, they're telling him about the mitzvahs. And Rashi says, why? The hashta ayde tefillah hu nichnas lechlal Geirus. Through this tefillah, he's entering into Geirus. Hilchach b'shas tefillas mitzvah. During this tefillah of mitzvah that he's doing to be megayer, tzarich lekabel of oil mitzvahs. He has to be mekabel upon himself the oil mitzvahs while he's toiveling. And therefore, they talk to him about the mitzvahs while he's toiveling. Taval va'ala, once he toivels, hareyu ki Yisrael l'chol dvarav. He's a regular Jew. He has the full status of a Jew, and therefore it's kedushin, like we're going to see later. Isha, what about a woman? You can't have men watch her go into the mikveh. Noshim mashivas oiseh b'mayim atzavar. Women usher her into the water until she's up to her neck. Ushnei talmidei chachamim oimdim lobi b'chutz. And the two talmidei chachamim stand out of the room. They can't see her, but they can still communicate with her. Just like for a male. And then the Brasha throws in one line, which is going to be the source of a lot of tumult. Echad ger ve'echad eved mishucher. Saya ger and saya eved mishucher. The meaning of this line is Saya ger has to be mekabel upon himself the mitzvahs, and if he's not, he doesn't become a ger. And when they free an Eved, we know when you free an Eved, the Eved becomes a Jew. Zok the Brayset here, the Eved doesn't automatically become a Jew. The Eved only becomes a Jew if he is mekabel upon himself all the mitzvahs. But if not, he wouldn't be mechayiv in the mitzvahs. So this is something that the Gemara is going to talk about. And then the Brayset goes on. What type of mikvah?
Yosy, can I ask you a question? I'm not sure if you said it, so I'm sorry if you said it. When you said before about the tzitzit, what's the hava mina? If it's not a good milah, why would you not have to do it? Why did the Gemara have to say that if the tzitzit is there, you have to cut it and do it? What's the hava mina otherwise?
The only thing that that's a very good kasha, but the only thing that I could think of is that it's telling you that the halachas of the milah for a ger is the same as the halacha of the milah for a regular child. And the tzitz and the ma'akv are ma'akv there as well. And the reason why I would think that that's what it means is because we're about to read the next line that's telling us what type of mikveh is good. A mikveh that's good for a nida is good for this. So we're comparing the activities done on a ger to the activities that are done in Eden, and we're making a point that they follow the same set of rules.
But if you have the tzitzin, then it's not called a milah, right? I mean, according to our standards.
It's not called a milah for a child, maybe it's called a milah for a ger.
Okay.
So maybe you still have to go You still have to go take away the tzitzit, but maybe it still makes him to a ger. I mean, again, I don't know that that's pshat. Your kasha is a much better kasha than my teretz. I'm just throwing up a possibility. Uvamakam shenid tabelasham, the same type of mikvah, meaning that has 40 saw that I need with toivel in, and this means a place where I needed toivels for tahairos. So if she wants to be able to touch tahairos, she has to toivel in the mikvah 40 saw. Sham ger the eved mishachar and toivel. That's where a ger and an eved mishachar would toivel. And the chaldover shechaytz b'tfila, and whatever would be a chatzitza for tfila, for a nida, who's toiveling with tahairos, chaytz beger u'beved mishachar u'benida, who's toiveling just to be with her husband.
This is in contrast to what, Tisha Kabin? Like, what's the contrast to this?
Yes, it's precisely a contrast to Tisha Kabin.
Okay.
Yes. Amar Mar said, Ger Shabal Hiskay. So now we're going to go back to analyze the Brisa line by line. Ger Shabal Hiskay, Oimuloi Maroyi Shabasal Hiskayer, Umoidino is a mitzvahs kalois, miktas mitzvahs kalois, umiktas mitzvahs kvurais. My time. Why do we tell him all these things? The parish nifresh, because if it scares him off and he changes his mind, let him. Why do we want to discourage Gerim from joining Klal Yisrael? Reb Chelboy said, "Kashim Gerim liYisrael kisapachas." Gerim are bad for the Jews like the plague. They're going to cause terrible problems to you. So, before I get into the explanation as to why, there are Rishonim or Masber. The reason why the Milah has to be before the Tefillah is also to discourage someone from becoming a Ger. Because if you tell him he's got to do a Milah, that'll spook him up. So before we even start with the process, we tell him he needs to get a bris. Maybe that'll discourage him.
Yosy, do you remember Rabbi Gruskin?
No.
Yeah, Moshe, you probably do. He was a Rav in Detroit. He had a
Of course, he's Sarah Browski's father-in-law.
right. So I once heard him speak. He spoke at some dinner or something, and he talked about the guy who came to the Rav and he wanted to be Megayer. So the Rav tried to talk him out of being Megayer. So he said to him, he says, there's a process you have to go through. He says, really, what's the process? He says, well, you're going to have to you're going to have to go into the ritual waters. He says, Rabbi, that doesn't sound so bad. He said, yeah, but that's not the end of it. He says, you're also going to have to get circumcised. He says, Rabbi, that sounds very painful. So the rabbi says to him, he says, well, I'll tell you the truth. He says, a very long time since I was circumcised. But one thing I do know, I couldn't walk or talk for a year afterwards.
Gewaldig. Gewaldig. Oh, gewaltig. Okay. Sagt er mal weiter. Umaydin oisoi avon leka chicha peyu ma'aser. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't explain why koshem gerim l'sholkas apachas. Rashi says it's because they come and they don't know their halachas and they do things that are wrong. And sometimes they're even convincing that they're right. And Yidden will follow their wrong halachas and get into trouble because of it. That's what Rashi says. But Tosfos in the Ramasal Koshem Gerim offers a couple of other explanations. One is that even if we don't learn from them, but if they do bad things, we're going to suffer because of Kol Yisrael, Arevim Zeh B'Zeh. And if they keep some of their bad habits from their previous religion, or lack thereof, we're going to be responsible.
A very heartwarming Gemara for, where it says, V'ahavta Sagir 7 times in the whatever, how many times in the Torah?
I'm happy you bring that up. Because there's another pshat. The last pshat, before I get to the middle pshat, the last pshat is since you have to be so careful with the feelings of a ger, and it's so hard not to sometimes misspeak, that'll cause us problems. Gerim are bad because being that they're so integrated amongst us, it's inevitable that something's going to happen, that we're going to say something that's going to hurt somebody, and that will cause a problem, and that's why it's kosher gerim l'Yisrael.
Your lights.
The other pshat. I'm sorry.
I think your
lights went out because of the timer.
This year became very romantic.
The lights went out because of the timer. I have no way of turning them back on without getting into the electrical room.
Right.
The Oidesh Shleimer, and the last shot is the Koshem Gerim Yisrael, because they mixed into us, and then you don't know your yichus. And we learned a couple of blot ago that if you don't know your exact yichus, the shechina is not shayra. So those were the different pshatim that we had. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on the big TV, and I'll see if I can find a bright screen. Okay, that's not bad. That lights it up. Let me pull this machine closer so I have the light off the screen. Okay, it's not bad. Okay. Sag to Gemara weiter. It's just creating a glare behind me, so I'll put it at an angle like this, so we get the light without the glare. Okay, perfect. Zok Tehele Gemara weiter. Now we are up to why is it that we teach him about Leka Chichil Peh? This is a very Yishmak Ishtikal. My timer. Why is it that we teach him about Leka Chichil Peh? You know why? Because Ben Noach Nerag al Pachas Mishava Pruta. Goyim have a hakpada, even on less than Shava Pruta. If you still less than Shava Pruta from a Yid, it's nothing. Because he's Moichel automatically. But a Goy is Makri. So therefore, and a Goy also, there's a Chiv Misa for any Avera that a Goy is over. So could you imagine? And you can't even pay back. They don't have the mitzvah of a Heshev Esakzela. So could you imagine if he becomes a Jew and he plants his field and now he sees people coming that are stealing from his field, taking the leka chikopeya, he's going to shoot them or pull out a shotgun or blow their heads off. Because from his background, that's what happens. Someone comes, takes from you, you blow them up. You blow them up, you get them out of you defend your land. Therefore, we need to tell them in advance, once you become Jewish, you need to know that people are going to be schnodding from you and you can't freak out. That's how it works over here. That was one shot. There are other pshatim that say we tell him that he's going to have to give stuff up, and that in and of itself is going to bother him because a goy doesn't want to give away even a drop of his nechos. Okay, we don't overdo it. Amar Belazar, my core, where do you see it in the pasuk? The chsiv, when Rus was pushing to come join Nami, and Nami kept pushing their way. It says, when Naomi saw that Rus was insisting on coming with her, finally she stopped pushing her away. So what was their whole conversation? She told her, Asir lon Tchum Shabbos. Tchum Shabbos is Asir Paras. So how did Rus answer? Wherever you go, I go. I have no problem with that. Asir lon Yichud. Yichud is us to us. So she answered, Vasher Talini Yolin, we used to Boston. Then Naomi told her, you know how many rules we have? Mafkedinon sheish meyos v'yudgam mitzvahs. We have 613 mitzvahs. So she responded, Amech Ami, Amin. Then she said, Asr lan b'avad chavim, it's Asr for us to do avodah zarah. So she answered, V'lekayach elikoi. So the Rishonim asked, a guy is not either allowed to do avodah zarah. So they answer that not only are you not allowed to serve avodah zarah is Asr b'ana. So all those gold statues, Rus, that you were planning to bring with you, you can't. You got to get rid of them. And then she said, Arba Misa is Nimsur Lebezdin. And then she said, Vasher Tamusu Amas. When you die, I'll die. And then Naomi told her, Beis Kvarim Nimsur Lebezdin. There's two graveyards for the people who do Skila and Sreifa. The people who get Skila and Sreifa, those who did terrible affairs. And then those who were over affairs that got him Hereg or Chedek. So she answered the Shomek over. Yad. After Naomi said, no matter what she threw at Rus accepted, and she accepted. So interesting, by all of the responses that Rus gave, she said, I'll be like you. But the last thing, she said, she didn't say, where you get buried, I'll get buried. What shot? So the Mefarshim tell us that Naomi told Rus, if you're going to do certain affairs, some of them are capital punishment. Some of them you can get killed for. So what did Rus answer? No, whatever you get killed for, I'll get killed for. Naomi was very offended. You might do an avera to be mechuyev Mrs. Bezdin. I'm not doing such an avera. Don't say Basher Tamusu Yamus. You might suffer. I'm not going to do such a thing. And Rus chap that Naomi wasn't happy, and that's why Naomi told her Beis Kvarim Nimsur Lebezdin. So then when Rus realized that maybe Naomi didn't like her answer to the last question, Rus modified her answer and said, Avada, you will never chas v'sholom be over in the Mrs. Bezdin. But even if I am, I accept upon myself all of the rules of Judaism as to how I'll be killed and where I'll be buried.
If it says all the 613, why does it single out certain things? Like, or why even bother with the 613?
There is a lot of Torah on it that I didn't have a chance to review, but I saw they do speak about it. So that's a very good.
Yeah, there's no difference the woman or the man. The man doesn't have 613 either.
The other thing I had shver was that it's funny that none of these are what the Brisa tell us to do. We're bringing a raya from her, but we're not using any of these things. So there's a lot of it. The other kasha they ask is Tchum Shabbos is the Rabbanan. So there are those who learn, they're trying to learn that 2,000 Amos is the Rabbanan, but 12,000 Amos is the Raisa. But the problem is the Targum on this pasuk says it's referring to 2,000 Amos. So there's a lot of Torah on this shtickle Gemara. Okay, let's see the Gemara weiter. Kibel malin oisemiyad. If he was makabel, they mala him right away. Why? My timer. Because you a mitzvah like machina, you don't delay a mitzvah. Once he agrees, you got to do it right away. The question is, what is the mitzvah? Is there a mitzvah that says that you have to make Geirus? What mitzvah is it? So we're showing him discuss what the mitzvah might be. Some say the mitzvah is the haftam as a ger. Showing love for a ger means even helping them become a ger. And the other one learns that it's a mitzvah of ahavas Hashem. If you love Hashem, you want to share the gewaltigkeit of the Rebbeinu Shalom with people like Avraham Avinu wanted to do. Okay, nishtayru boy titina ma'akvin amila kititnan elu and titina ma'akvin amila. These are the skin areas that are going to get involved, that are going to break the milah, that make the milah possible. Basar hachoyp es roif hatar. It's skin, foreskin that covers most of the atar. And if a kohen has such a bris and there's basar remaining, that's choyp es roif hatar. It doesn't mean that most of the circumference of the atara has to be covered with foreskin, even if a tiny little bit of the circumference is covered with foreskin. But roiv the height, the foreskin extends to roiv the height of the atara, that will hassle the bris. Nisrape, once the wound of the bris heals, matbilnas mayad, nisrape loy, nisrape loy. Of course, you're not going to toivel somebody in a mikveh when they have an open wound. My timer, we show the maya merzumak. Water is not good for a makkah.
Yosy,
Okay.
what about, you said miyad, but obviously if the tefillah didn't happen, you can wait overnight. But so you're not going to complete the whole thing miyad, right?
Right. No, miyad means as soon as possible.
As soon as possible. Okay.
Because at night you can't toivel, like we learned before. For Geirus. Ushnei talmidei chacham oimin al gabav. Frank Gemara, didn't we just learn you need three? V'amar b'yechid on gimel. Ger torch shleisha. So Gemara, you're right. V'amar b'yechid on latana tani shleisha. Rabbi Yechid said that you have to change it to three. Taval ba'olah. Oh, my guy shut off. Let's try again. Taval ba'olah. Zog to Gemara.
I thought you had your TV on a Shabbos clock.
The Hadabay, let's say right after he toivels, the ger says, I think I made a mistake. I think I want to change my mind. Umekadish Bas Yisrael, and he's Mekadish. A Bas Yisrael, Mumar Karinabe, Yisrael Mumar Karinabe, but he's a Yisrael. And therefore, the Kiddush of Kedushin, his Kedushin is Chal. Echad ger be'echad eved meshukher, Kasol Kadaitach, Lekabul Alav, oil mitzvahs. At first glance, when we touch this phrase, it means that an Eved Meshucher is not for sure, it's not mandatory that if he gets freed, he's automatically a Jew. He actually has to do a Kabbalah's oil mitzvahs. Or a mini fractic Gemara, I'm going to show you that an Eved, once you free him, he's automatically a full Jew, even if he doesn't make a new Kabbalah's mitzvahs. Because the Brisa says as follows. Eved Meshucher ain't tzarich l'kabel. Nevin Meshucher does not have to be Makabel oil mitzvahs. He's automatically a Yid. So that's a stira. It's a direct contradiction to our brisa. So Amar B'Sheish L'Kasha. It's a machlokes tanoim. Our brisa holds that the Eved has to be Makabel again, and the brisa we just quoted holds the Eved doesn't have to be Makabel again. Harab Shimon ben Elazar Harab on them. The Tanya we learned. Ubebita. No, I'm sorry. Ubachsa esavia v'sima. We're going to discuss now the parsha of Yefas Toyar. She has to mourn her parents for 30 days, the pasuk says, because we want her to be in your front entrance and to be a nuisance, so that the person who wants the Yefas Toyar will lose their cheshek for her and get rid of her. So the question is there any way to expedite the process? Is there any way this guy who wanted this woman, is there any way that he's able to get the process to go faster? Oh, this is not good. Oh, one second, this is not good. Okay, is there any way for him to get the process to go faster? It's not better. Is there any way for him to move the process faster? The Zok Gemara. This is the option. Zok Gemara. The Tanya Bachas of Yevasima. But remember the Baruch Kiblala. That's if she wasn't a couple Geirus. Al Kiblala. What if after 3 days she says, you know what? I give up. I want to become a Jewish woman. Then Matbila Umoter Bamiya. Then he's allowed to live with her right away. What if she doesn't want me? So according to Chum, there is no solution. But Reb Shimon ben Elazar, I have a solution where you could expedite the process and force her to become a full Jew, and then you could live with her right away. And this is what he said. Even though she won't be Mekabel Geirus, but you could force her into Shivchas. You could force her to Toivel to become a Shivcha, because Reb Shimon ben Elazar clearly holds that when you make somebody into an Eved or a Shivcha, there you could force upon that person Kabbalah's mitzvahs, and the equivalent by a male would be you could force him to get a bris and to toivel and to accept mitzvahs keisha. And once she's your shivcha, then you could free her. And then umuter miyad, then you'll be mutter right away. So you clearly see from Reb Shimon ben Elazar that when you free the eved, automatically the eved has to keep all the mitzvahs, and they don't have an option today to keep the mitzvahs. So Zok Gemara, we had two brises. Our brisa said that they have to be makabel the mitzvahs when you free them, and that would be consistent with the Rabbanon, who didn't find any solution to force this Yefas Toyar to become Jewish more quickly. But Reb Shimon ben Elazar holds that you could force the Eved Meshucher to be makabel the mitzvahs. And therefore, the brisa that says that an Eved Meshucher does not need to be makabel on the mitzvahs, that would go like Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Amar Rava. Rava says, my time with Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Where did Reb Shimon ben Elazar get this halacha from that you can force an Eved to be makabel the mitzvahs? Now let me just make it super duper clear. We are looking for a proof that when you free the Eved, the Eved is automatically makabel all the mitzvahs. But the raya that we're going to bring, in fact, is that when you enlist the Eved in the first place, you could force them to do the mitzvahs that an Isha has to do. And this is the pasuk. This pasuk is talking about the Korban Pesach. Kol Eved Ish Miknas Kesef. If you mal the Eved, then you can eat your Korban Pesach. Because if you have avodim that didn't get a bris, you can't eat the Korban Pesach. Now we're going to dash from this pasuk, although it's talking about Korban Pesach, we're going to dash in a halacha that has absolutely nothing to do with Korban Pesach. So we ask a question right away on the pasuk. Kol Eved Ish. Are you saying Eved Ish v'lo Eved Isha? Is the Torah trying to tell you when it says Eved Ish to exclude the Eved of a woman, and maybe the Eved of a woman that doesn't get a bris will not stop her from eating the Korban Pesach? That's not logical. Avada, a woman who has an Eved that doesn't have a bris, can also not eat from the Korban Pesach. Ella, we have to have a whole new pshat in this pasuk that has nothing to do with Pesach. Rather, it's teaching us a whole new halacha. Ella Eved Ish atamol ba'korchai. Who could you make a bris on, even against their will? The Eved Ish. V'yatamol ben Ish ba'korchai. So from Eved, Dafka and Eved, you can force him to do Milah and be makabel mitzvahs. But a regular guy, you can't force them to become a ger. And this will be the makar of Reb Shimon ben Elazar, that you can force the Eved to be makabel the mitzvahs k'Eved, and by extension, he holds there's no difference. You can also force the Eved to be makabel mitzvahs when you're free him. Rabbanon, what about the Rabbanon who disagree and hold this doesn't work. You can't force the Yafas Toyer. Amrullah, he says, Misvara, Kishem Shiat Hamol Ben Ishbal Korchai, if you can't force a regular goy to be Makabal the mitzvahs, Kach Iat Hamol Eved Ishbal Korchai. You can't force an Eved to be Makabal the mitzvahs either. So what is he going to learn from this pasuk? V'laksiv kol Eved Ish. What did he learn from that pasuk? A completely separate halacha that has nothing to do with our sugya. If someone goes to his Eved and says, you are hefker, he goes free, he doesn't need to get shikhr. It says in the pasuk called Eved Ish, miknes chassid. So we asked the same question we asked before. Eved Ish, lo Eved Isha. Elo we darshan Eved sheyesh lo yishus l'rabbi yalav kori Eved. An Eved whose adon controls him because he was not mafker him. That's called an Eved. But an Eved who's no longer controlled by his Adon because the Adon has already been mafker him, ain't Kari Eved. So the Gemara at this point holds that the machlok is whether or not a Yafas Toyer can be coerced into becoming Jewish using the slavery route is a machlok between the Rabbanon and Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Frag the Gemara, Moskov Lo Papa. Who said that the Shiloh of our Brisa, when the Eved on the way out, who said that has anything to do with the machlokes between the Rabbanon and Reb Shimon ben Elazar by Yafas Toyer? Emar de Shamas Pula Rabbanon by Yafas Toyer. By Yafas Toyer, the Rabbanon said you cannot force her through the slavery route. You know why? You're talking about a regular shiksa who never had any shaychas to mitzvahs. Therefore, you can't just impose upon her mitzvahs. But Abul Eved the shaykh mitzvahs. But an Eved who has already been practicing Yiddishkeit, because an Eved has to practice Yiddishkeit. He has to practice the mitzvahs of an Isha. So he already is doing half of the mitzvahs already. Maybe the Rabbanan would agree that when you free that Eved, they're obliged and automatically become Jews and they have to keep all the mitzvahs. Hakanami dafilu Rabbanan maidu. And I'll prove it to you that the Rabbanan agree that an Eved, when an Eved gets freed, he doesn't have to be Makabal the mitzvahs. Rather, automatically he's Mechuyev in the mitzvahs, which will be a tremendous problem because our Brisa said, Echad Gar, Echad Eved Meshuchrer, and we learned that he has to be Makabal the mitzvahs. But it seems like we don't have anybody who agrees to that. The Tanya we learned, Echad Gar, Echad Loikeach Eved Mino Eved Nechavim, and Rashi tells us that this is someone who's buying the Eved because he wants to immediately free the Eved. That's all that's happening. He's buying the Eved and immediately freeing the Eved. So Saya Ger and Sai is someone who buys an Eved from a Goy because he wants to free the Eved immediately. Tzorech lekabel. This Eved that the Jew just bought to free will not become a Jew unless the Eved is mekabel upon himself oil mitzvahs. Ha, l'keich ben Yisrael. Since the Bryce only lists off buying it from a Goy, vice the Goy, if you bought this Eved from a Yid and then you freed it right away, ain't tzorech lekabel. We say the Eved is automatically Jewish without another Kabbalah's mitzvahs. So let's think about this money. Who is this Brisa going according to? Reb Shimon ben Elazar. If you want to say it's going according to Reb Shimon ben Elazar, it wouldn't make sense because he says he said you could take the Yafas Toyar, so it's literally like taking an Eved from a Goy who had no shaychas to mitzvahs, and you could force it upon them. So clearly, this Brisa cannot be going according to Reb Shimon ben Elazar. It must be going according to the Rabbanon, who holds that when you buy from a Goy, you cannot force the mitzvahs upon them, but you see that when you buy from a Yid, even the Rabbanon would agree that the mitzvahs are automatically forced upon this Eved. So that means we have no one to say that there's a shita in the Tanoim that hold that an Eved needs to be Mekabel mitzvahs. Everyone seems to agree that an Eved is automatically Mechuyev in all mitzvahs once the Eved is toivel to go free. That comment in our Brisa is going to be shver. Dr. Gemara, it's not talking about Kabbalah's oil mitzvahs because Avada, everybody agrees that the Eved does not have to be Mekabel oil mitzvahs. Rather, the Eved's automatically Mechoyev in the mitzvahs. So what is it talking about? That a Ger and the Eved Meshukher have the same halacha? Kitanya Yili and Tefillah Tanya. All it's saying is that if you want to free an Eved, then the Eved has to, if you want to free an Eved, then the Eved has to get Tefillah. Tanu Rabban, we learned in the Bryce. This is talking about how we treat the Yefas Toyer and what we do to her to discourage this soldier from wanting to be with her. The Gilchas Roisha, they shave her head. They also sip her nail and they make her nails. What does it mean they make her nails? It means they cut her nails, they trim the nails. That's not something that makes her ugly. But if that's what the Torah says, it's Geirus HaKosav, that's what we must do. To the contrary, we make her grow her nails long, they should become wild and unkempt, so that once again he will lose his interest in her. Omer Eliezer, let me tell you why I know it means to cut. Because Namra Asiya Beroish, there is a chiyuv to do something to her head. V'Namra Asiya B'Tzipranayim, and there's a chiyuv to do something with her nails. Let's say they're equal. Mal alon havar. Just like when we were speaking about her head, we were talking about shaving her head. Afghan, so too, we were talking about her nails. Havara, let's say it means something parallel. It means that we're cutting her nails. Rabbi Kiva Omer, it's also parallel, but in a different way. Namar Asiya B'Roish v'Namar Asiya B'Tzipranayim. Mal alon nivel. Just like when we're shaving her head, it makes her disgusting. What about all the Satmar Chassidim? The Satmar Chassidim, their wives covered their hair with a shmata or with a shaitel. But here, she actually was bald, which made her look disgusting. I might get punched in the nose now from Schwarzer. I better be careful for saying that. Afkan, nivel. So too by the nails, it means nivel as well. And it means you leave her nails to grow long. We're going to bring a raya that doing your nails means to leave them to grow long, not to trim them. Because there was a story when Absalom died, Rachman al-Islam, David HaMelech was sitting Shiva, was being misapple for his son, Absalom. Mephibosheth was from the enemy camp, he was the son of Shaul. And Mephibosheth wanted to demonstrate loyalty to David HaMelech and to show that he shared in the pain and the availus of David HaMelech. So when Mephibosheth came to greet David, Mephibosheth ben Shaul, Yored Likras HaMelech, well, also Raglov, he didn't do his feet, which means he didn't cut his nails, his toenails. Rashi says, also Svamai, and he didn't trim his mustache. So you see from here, my Asiya Havara, you see clearly that the definition of Asiya is trimming. Now, interesting enough, this gets involved with the Israel Silbash, because although Rashi learns it means he didn't cut his nails, his toenails, Tosfos learned that he didn't trim his pubic hair. So Tosfos goes into a whole shaila if one is allowed to cut their pubic hair. Tosfos seems to say that with a razor, you're not allowed to cut off your pubic hair or your armpit hair. But if you want to trim it with the scissors, that's a shaila. So halacha l'maisa, I don't know, but there is a shaila, at least in the Rishonim, if one's allowed to trim their hidden hairs where with a scissors, not with a razor. But I don't understand is how in the world Mephibosheth was doing this to demonstrate to David availus. So if it was toenails that we're talking about by Raglov, maybe he was wearing sandals, they saw his toenails. But if it's talking about his pubic hair, how in the world would David and Melech have seen that? So why would that even be an expression of availus? So I don't know. Back to the situation with Yefas Toyer, she has to mourn and cry for her parents for 30 Yerach Yom, for 30 days. We'll see how many days that really is. Now, the purpose of this was, once again, he should lose his interest in her. She's just a crying mess. For 30 days, he's not going to be interested. Zok Gemara, Belezer Aimer, Avia is Avia Mamish, and Ima is Ima Mamish. Rabbi Kiva Aimer, Avia means Avia V'Ima Zu Avoidis Kechav. Avia V'Ima is referring to her Avoidis Zosh. She's crying because she's being forced to abandon her religion. V'Chenu Aimer, Aimer Mala'et, they would say to a piece of wood, Aviata, which means you're giving value to a piece of wood. you're making an avodah zarah out of it. I'm sure everybody heard the famous story where a teacher went around in class in Russia and asked the children, what does your mother do? Oh, my mother's an engineer. And what does your father do? My father's a nuclear physicist. And what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a soldier in the Russian army. And then they asked one kid, who's your mother? Mother Russia. Who's your father? Father Lenin. And what do you want to be when you grow up? Oh, I would love to be an orphan. How long is this for? Yerach Yomim. What is Yerach Yomim? Yerach is Shloshim Yom. 30 days is the process. Reb Shimon ben Elazar, it's much longer than that. It's Tishim Yom. It's 90 days. Why is that? How do you get that? Because Yerach is Shloshim Yom. A month is 30 days. And Yerach is Shloshim. Yomim is Shloshim. Yomim also means Shloshim. And the article brings down from the Karen Oira that we say Yomim is a significant amount of days, similar to the group of days that we just discussed with the word Yerach. And then the pasuk says, "Va'achakein tavi alechu ba'alto." So Va'achakein also adds another set of 30 days. So that's 90 days total. Maskav lo Rabina, Frek Rabina Akasha. Maybe you should learn it differently. Ema Yerach Shloshim Yomim. I'm sorry. Ema Yerach Shloshim Yomim Shloshim. And maybe Va'achakein tells you that you need another set of 60, like the previous two sets of 30. Va'achakein Kihani, just like the previous two. So maybe you should need 120 days. Kasha, the Gemara says Kasha, but the Gemara is not in the spool. We're still maintaining 90 days according to Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Tanu Rabbanan, Mekaymin avodim she'eino malam. You're allowed to retain an eved even though the eved refuses to get a milah. So right off the bat, didn't we just learn from the Psukim, at least according to Reb Shimon ben Elazar, that you could force an eved to get milah? So Taisa speaks out that according to the Rivan, one of the reasons why you force the eved is because if the eved's a goy, he can make your wine yayin nesach. So the Rishonim tell us if you force a eved to mal and become Jewish, but he doesn't want, it's not going to serve you very well because he could still mess you up. And therefore, if the eved doesn't want to take a bris, so the first sheet is Mekaymin Avodim Shem, you could keep them. They're Rabbi Shmuel. But Rabbi Kiva says, Givar ain't Mekaymin, you cannot keep them at all. They're too dangerous. Amalei Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel proved to Rabbi Kiva that you're allowed to keep such an eved. You see so in the Torah. As a Reyu Aimer, when speaking about Shabbos, it lists off all the people who have to refrain from doing malacha, and in the list it says v'yinofesh ben hamasecha, the son of your shifcha, meaning your eved, also has to rest on Shabbos. So that's, we're going to see in a moment, that's referring to an eved that did not get a bris. The question is, if you're not allowed to have such an eved, like Rabbi Kiva holds, if you're not allowed to have such an eved, what do you mean he's mechuyev in Shabbos? He shouldn't be your eved at all. Omer lei, so Rabbi Kiva answered, you know what happened? This pasuk is speaking about a person who bought this eved right before Shabbos, didn't have a chance to give it a bris. So of course you're not allowed to keep it even for one day. But in this circumstance, for that Shabbos, till Motzei Shabbos, we have to make sure that this eved keeps Shabbos. To chula alma miyas, v'yinafash ben hamasecha is be'eved oro tzid. It seems like everybody agrees, even Rabbi Kiva, that this pasuk is referring to an eved that's an oral. How do you know? Ben hamasecha, where do you get from that it's an oral? My mashma, the Tanya we learned, v'yinafash ben hamasecha. Ba'avur oral ha'kosav medab. We're talking be'eved, be'eved oral ha'kosav medab. We're speaking about an eved who's an oral. Be'eved oral. Maybe it's an eved that has a mole. Who said it's speaking about an eved that's an oral? There's another pasuk that talks about the chiyuv for an eved to keep Shabbos. So there, hare eved mol omer. We already know a regular eved that had milah is mechuyev in shmir Shabbos. We have another pasuk that once again talks about an Evet. It's extra. So therefore, we apply it to the Evet Oral, to an Evet Oral. Period. Now we're going to darshan the next line in the pasuk. The ger also has to keep Shabbos. What is this ger? Ze ger toisha. This is a ger toisha, which Rashi says was makabel upon himself zayin mitzvahs b'nei noyach, but not all the mitzvahs. He has to keep Shabbos. Why does he have to keep Shabbos, Dr. Rashi? Because someone who's machal Shabbos is ki'ilu avad avodah zarah. Correct, Toisvis. If you're telling me that the ger toisha keeps Shabbos, that means it's not zayin mitzvahs b'nei noyach; it's 8 mitzvahs. That's number one. Number two, a ger who keeps Shabbos is chayv misa. So how could you say that a ger toisha has to keep Shabbos? A guy, he's a regular guy. He's just keeping the zayin mitzvahs b'nei noyach. He's not allowed to keep Shabbos. So Toshus learns that when it says that a ger toisha can't do malacha, it means a ger toisha can't do malacha on behalf of a yid. So you can't use this ger toisha as your Shabbos guy. That's all it's saying. But avada for himself, a ger toisha can surely do malacha. Oy einoi ela ger tzedek. Maybe when it says vager, it means a regular ger. So Gemara, there's another pasuk that already mentions a ger. Kishu aimer begercha asher b'sharecha hariger tzedek omer. Amani mikayim vager ze ger toisha. Beautiful. Omer b'shum levi. Halakeach evet min ha'evet kachav. What if you bought an evet from a guy, v'loy ratzalamu, and he didn't want it to get a bris? So the halacha is Dr. B'shum levi megalgal ima yajud v'schaydish. You work with him for 12 months, and loy mol, if he still refuses to get a bris, chayzer umoychay la'oivdei kachav. You sell him back to the guy. Amru Rabbanan Hamed Rapapa. The Rabbanan said over this halacha in front of Rapapa, and they told Rapapa, it seems, command the like Rabbi Akiva. It seems that this brisa, Rabbi Shulman Levi, would be inconsistent with Rabbi Akiva. Why? The Rabbi Akiva, Amar Ein Mekaymin. Rabbi Akiva says you can't even keep the habit for one day. Surely not 12 months. Amalu Rapapa, Afilu Temi Rabbi Akiva, even if you're going to say this is going according to Rabbi Akiva, sometimes, according to Rabbi Akiva, you could keep a eved for 12 months without a bris. That's only if we never made up. If we never made up that he's going to get a bris, he's a regular guy, then I have to get rid of him right away. But if we made up when I bought him that he was going to get a bris, and then after I bought him, he got cold feet, then even Rabbi Akiva allows you to keep the evet and to work with him for 12 months. Maybe you'll be able to convince him to get a bris. If not, you have to sell him back. They made up, and therefore you give him some time. We said over this pshat and how Rabbi Akiva would allow an evet to remain in your possession for 12 months under these circumstances. And Rabbi Zivit asked, Amrli Ihachi, before we had a kasha, it says V'yinofish ben Amasacha, and we asked, how is it possible, according to Rabbi Akiva, that you should have a evet without a bris, even for one day, even for Shabbos? So the Gemara answered, according to Rabbi Akiva, maybe it's speaking where he bought the evet right before Shabbos. Why couldn't we answer that it was in that 12-month period? Why didn't he answer that it was in the 12-month period? Zog to Gemara, there's two different reasons how Rabbi Akiva could explain the pasuk. And he picked one of the two reasons, that he just bought the evet. But who did? If he bought the evet a while ago, but they made a deal that he was going to get a bris, and he's just trying to convince him to stick to his deal, for 12 months, he can keep that evet. Shalach Rabin Mishmeid Rabbi Loi. Rabin sent, and he said over in the name of Rabbi Loi, and B'chol Rabbi said, Amrli Mishmoi. And Rabin said, not only did I hear this from Rabbi Loi, all of my rabbis told the same thing to me in Rabbi Loi's name. So I'm sure that this is what Rabbi Loi said. And he said as follows, Eizeu Eved Oral Shemutir L'Kaimoi. What type of Eved Oral is an Adon allowed to keep, even though he's an Oral? It's Zeh Shalach Rabbi Al-Manas Shaloi L'Murla. If you bought the Eved with a T'nai, that you shouldn't have to give him a bris, then you're allowed to keep him permanently. Now the question is, could this be consistent with Rabbi Akiva? Amru Rabbana Kamed Rapapa, command like Rabbi Akiva. This is not consistent with Rabbi Kiva. Here, Rabbi Kiva, Amar Ein Mekayim. Rabbi Kiva said you cannot keep an Eved without a bris. So Amalu Rabbi Papa, no, I feel to Rabbi Kiva. Maybe Rabbi Kiva would agree to this as well. When did Rabbi Kiva say you cannot keep the Eved for a moment if he didn't have a bris? That's if you didn't make a t'nai. But if you made a t'nai, maybe you wouldn't need a bris. So now we have a third teretz for that kasha. Rabbi Yehuda could have learned that when it says v'inavish ben masecha, we'll be talking about an Eved that you buy with a t'nai. So Amar Rav Khan, Amrisa l'shmai tzakamed Rav Zvid min Erdo, and he asked me the same question. He should have answered this answer. You have another answer anyway about Pascha. Gemara, you're right. He gave one answer, but in fact, there's three different ways Rabbi Akiva could have explained the pasuk that talks about an Eved without a bris. Either he just bought it that day, or they made up to do the bris, so you give him 12 months, or the t'nai that he doesn't need a bris at all. Zok to Gemara weiter. Yosef, Rab Chanina, Bar Papi, Rab Ami, Rab Yitzchak Nafka, Akila, the Rab Yitzchak Nafka. These three Talmidei Chacham were sitting on the stoop outside the home of Rab Yitzchak Nafka, and they're talking and learning. The Yasir Kamri, Ir Achas, there was once a city, Haisa Eretz Yisrael, in Eretz Yisrael, V'leiratu Avadei Lamu. The Avadim in that city refused to get a bris. And they worked with them for 12 months, but they would not be willing to get a bris, and therefore they ended up selling them to Goyim. Kiman. So who would this story be consistent with? It's consistent with this Tana. The Tanya we learned, if one buys an Eved from Goyim, and the Eved didn't want to get a bris, if after 12 months you couldn't convince him, in Eretz Yisrael, you could never ever allow an Eved not to have a bris. Why? If they have such a high rate. If this Eved has the status of a Goy, well, a Goy is Tomei. And if a Goy touches Truma, he'll make a Tomei. So therefore, you cannot afford to have a Goy in your household. So in Eretz Yisrael, there's no leeway. If the Eved will not convert and get a bris and be Mekal mitzvahs, he's out the door. And if it happens to be a city that's near the border, then ain't mashing noise a kalikar, mamish got to get rid of him. You know why? Because he can act as a spy. Shema Yishamadover, he might hear some compromising information on the security of Klal Yisrael. And they'll tell his friend, a guy in the enemy camp, and risk the security of all of Klal Yisrael. Tanya B'chananya b'nosh Rabbi Gamaliel Eimer, Mipnei ma gerim b'zman hazeh me'unin v'yisurin bon alayim. Why is it that gerim nowadays, they're never matzliach, they tend to be never making it? Why? Zokt Gemara Mipnei shelakimu yisheva mitzvahs b'nei noyach. Because when they were goyim, before they converted, they were not mekayim sheva mitzvahs b'nei noyach. And Rashi says, when they were goyim, they didn't get punished. You know why? Because Hashem wanted to save their punishment for the next world, where it's much worse. But once they became Yidden, now Hashem says, you know what? I'd rather punish them in this world, so in Olam Haba, they'll go straight to Gan Eden. I once heard over, someone once told me, why is it you find that when a Jew, Shmadzach, in Hatchasanim, it's a Goite, it's a Kennedy, it's on the upper echelon of society. But Punkt verkehrt, when a Goy wird a Yid, wird a Schlepper. Hat einer mir gesagt, Poshet Pshat, a Yid, was Shmadzach ab, hat a Yiddische gehabt, mit Goyische Masel. Aber a Goy, was wird a Yid, bleibt mit a Goyische gehabt, mit Yiddische Masel. Der Rebbe ist nicht Matzliach. Aber Yosy Eimer, Geirus this guy, a Ger will never get punished for a virus that he did while he was a Goy. Because he's a new creature once he becomes a Ger, and therefore that's not why he has Yisurin. So why does he have Yisurin? It's because Gerim are not Talmid Chachamim, and they make mistakes, so they do a lot of averis inadvertently. Abba Chanan Aimer Mishum Rav Elazar Libishinoisin May Ahava Elameyira. They do mitzvahs not from Ahavas Hashem, rather because they're terrified of the Einish. Acher Mayrim Mipnei Sheshow Atzon Lichanes Tachas Kafe Yishchina. It's because we told them, what took you so long? They get petched because what took them so long? You should have joined Yiddishkeit much earlier. Where do you see that there's a taina? What took you so long? Omar Bavo B'Temer of Chanina, my Kara. Boyas told Rus. Once again, this is about a Yom Tov that we're looking forward to. Yishalem Hashem Pa'olech. Hashem should pay you back, Rus. U'tihim Askurtach Shleima Me'im Hashem Elokei Yisrael Asher B'Asar Lachzois B'Goymer. Because you came, and Rashi said you came now. You came quickly. Shemi Harto V'lo Yicharto. So Boyas mentioned that Rus has a Maila, that you came quickly. So you see that there's a tefiyah on a ger, why you waited so long, why you didn't come more quickly. And with that, Baruch Hashem, we're finished Mem Zayin and Mem Ches. We'll start Mishim Mem Tes tomorrow. We'll be finishing the Perek Bez Hashem tomorrow. I want to wish everybody a good Tavach and a good Zimmer, and we should be zoichet to all the brachas of Pesach, including a Bizis Hayom. You should have bracha v'atzlacha with a great sheva, v'ruchnius, v'gashmitz.
Amen.
Yes,
Yes,
9 o'clock tomorrow?
Yes, 9 o'clock and 7 o'clock. Yeah.
and the davening is 8:15. They have the regular minyanim schedule tomorrow. The
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe so.
Yosy, you know the story about Chaim will decides he's going to become a guy. He wants to get shmat